I believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear them. So come with me as we take a walk down Fascination Street.
You know that 3 o'clock energy lag that everybody feels? Where normally you're reaching for a Coca-Cola or a Starbucks? Well, now you don't have to. Forget everything that you think you know about inhalation and imagine a world where inhaled products are designed for health and wellness. Imagine inhaled products engineered to be free of toxins and instead provide a functional benefit with every breath. Well, that world is now. Introducing electronic caffeine from the good folks at Inhale Health. Inhalation allows caffeine to be absorbed instantaneously, providing faster effects than possible through beverages or pills. Instead of rushing to your favorite soft drink or Starbucks for a dump truck full of calories, now you can just reach into your pocket and pull out your disposable caffeine vape pen. Each 3-second inhalation introduces 16 micrograms of caffeine directly into your bloodstream. So finally, that midday burst of energy you're looking for is just a breath away. Each vape pen comes preloaded with 400 breaths, which is roughly a 1-month supply, and is already charged. You don't need to refill it. You don't need to recharge it. When you're done, simply throw it in the recycle bin and order another one. I love this product so much that I actually reached out to the company and asked them to sponsor my show. And they agreed. So here's what they're going to do. Every one of my listeners who goes to inhalehealth.com and orders any of their 7 different vape pen products is going to get a 10% discount plus free shipping when you put in the promo code FSP as in Fascination Street Podcast. So there it is, guys. That's inhalehealth.com, 10% off any of their 7 products, free shipping. Promo code FSP. So give it a shot. You'll be glad you did. Okay, guys, I've been sitting on this episode for quite some time because I wanted to get it just right. And since that's never going to happen, I decided to go ahead and release it now. This episode is with writer, podcaster, and musician Phil Rossi. In this episode, we talk about how he got into podcasting well over 10 years ago, how he inspired me to get into podcasting. We talk about what made him become a writer and a musician, and how he incorporates music into all of his writing. There is a giveaway in this, so pay attention. And Phil Rossi lets me play his version of a classic song that everybody knows from the 80s, and this version is going to be your new favorite song. It's certainly mine. I've listened to it a million times. I love this song. And of course, we talk about Phil's podcast and his Patreon project. Enjoy, guys. This is musician, author, podcaster, and super good dude, Phil Rossi.
Yeah, talk to me, yeah.
Welcome to Fascination Street, Phil Rossi. Before you say anything, I want to tell you that it was more than 10 years ago that I stumbled upon you and your audio books.
Yeah.
I was working at a bank and I was bored out of my fucking mind, and I was not a customer facing person, so I could, wear whatever I wanted basically and have headphones on all day. And you can only listen to the same 9 songs so many times before you want to jump out a window. And so I stumbled upon this thing called Audiobooks. Now, Audiobooks, a long time ago, it was a podcast aggregator that really focused on episodic fiction. And it was the saving grace between Scott Sigler, Seth Harwood, Phil Rossi, J.C. Hutchins, and maybe 1 or 2 others. You guys are the reason that I was able to work that stupid fucking shit job for as long as I did. So first off, thank you very, very much, Phil Rossi.
And you're very welcome. And it's testimonials like that I think that's some of the best feedback and some of the is back at doing this and is doing it back then that I can get, knowing that I have made someone's life in some, even if it's small way, more bearable. I mean, that goes a long way for keeping me inspired and motivated to keep doing what I do.
Well, that's good to hear, but it was not in a small way that you guys changed my life. You guys have impacted my life ever since then. I have listened to, because of you guys getting me really interested in podcasting, I have listened to literally more than 50,000 hours of podcasts. And that's when, I did a podcast with my buddy for a little bit, and then I started my own podcast, and it has taken me all over the country, and I've gotten to meet the most amazing people, and none of that, Phil, would I have been able to do, or would I have even thought possible if it wasn't for you, those other fools I mentioned, and audiobooks. So thank you so much, man.
Hey, you're welcome. And honestly, I mean, by you doing what you're doing and getting out there and helping people tell their stories and sharing the stories of some incredible people. I mean, you have quite a catalog and a lot of diversity, and I mean that contributes to the validity of this beast called podcast. It's having quality content out there, interesting people that gets people listening, keeps it going, and so if I played some part in you getting out there and doing that, then again, I want to say my job is done here, but I still, every day, I still feel like I'm just kind of getting started. But man, that's an incredible thing to say, and I really do appreciate it.
Good. Well, thank you for helping me out. So let's talk about you and not about me. So
let's do it.
Here's an interesting question for you. Actually, I'm going to save that. Where are you from, Phil?
I grew up in New England. I grew up in Connecticut, and I relocated to Virginia for college and ended up staying down here. So I'm outside of Washington, D.C., about 40 minutes west of the city, in a little sort of suburb. Yeah, so I've been here, was it 2018? So I've been in this area for 17, 18 years.
So you're the third person that I've interviewed from Connecticut, and guess what? You're the third author that I've interviewed from Connecticut. Everybody that I interview from Connecticut is an author. Get out of here.
Must be something in the water up there, I guess.
It is.
I will say this: I always found that there's a certain magic to New England. Maybe because I grew up there, but I don't know. There's just something about the area. I think there's a lot of history up there, and being someone who loves the horror genre, writes in that genre from an early age, just growing up in that area, telling local stories with my friends, and being out late on summer nights or walking through the graveyards up there. I do feel there's a certain magic kind of behind the scenes that lends to inspiration. So maybe there's something to that where these authors coming out of there. I don't know.
Well, you mentioned walking through graveyards, and that's going to come up later in some other questions that I have for you. But first, I'm going to pose the same question to you that I posed to the other two authors from Connecticut. Have you read A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court?
Many, 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 many years ago. I mean, we're talking high school.
I want to kiss you so bad right now. So the first young lady that I asked, she was right around 30, probably a couple of years before that. She had never heard of it. The other person that I asked was somewhere around 50 and had heard of it but not read it. And here you are. You have heard of it and read it. That makes me feel happy because it was required reading here in San Antonio, Texas.
Yeah.
In the 80s.
And I'm pretty sure it was, I don't think I just picked it up and read it, but, I still do actually remember a little bit about the book. I know the protagonist, what is his name, Hank Morgan, if I'm remembering, bumped his head and traveled through time is pretty much what I remember of it. Maybe that's as far as I got into it. I don't know.
I feel like that's really all that matters.
It really is.
Okay, so what took you from Connecticut to where you are now? Did you say Virginia or West Virginia?
Virginia. Okay. So I went to school down here, did undergrad at James Madison University. I started off as a music major, believe it or not, and they had a really good music program. I played trombone, and the new trombone instructor there was, had some good good trombone cred, I guess you would say. They had a strong jazz program, and as a young buck, I thought I was going to become this jazz trombone player, and so that initially got me down here. And then I didn't stick with the music major. Started dating a girl in college, and got a little serious enough that I stayed in the area. We're no longer together, but that kind of kept me down here. I sort of established a career down here, circle of friends, got involved in the music scene, and here I am 18 years later, still in the area.
Rock on. Okay, now for the hard-hitting questions.
Yes.
When did you release your very first episode of your very first podcast?
My very first episode of my very first podcast. All right. So the podcast was Filling the Page, which I believe might have even started off as a blog. I want to say the first episode of Filling the Page may have been February of 2005, maybe.
I just know that it was before anybody else that anybody's ever heard of. It was before Adam Carolla. It was before Mark Maron. It was before Chris Hardwick. It was before Kevin Smith. You guys are old school.
Yeah, we're going back to, I know podcasting was still really in its infancy. Around 2005 is where people started talking about podcasts. I stumbled across, while actually looking for blogs, believe it or not, to kind of get me inspired to write, stumbled across Murr Lafferty's I Should Be Writing podcast, and so that was kind of my gateway drug. And I said, wow, this podcast thing is pretty cool, and that kind of led me down this winding path to Scott Sigler and T. Morris and the other folks at the time that were kind of paving the way, and I fell completely in love with it, and here I am today. Yeah, I have not gone back and listened to those early episodes, but I think it would be probably quite a trip to check some of that stuff out.
I'm sure that would be a trip.
And there was this real air of kind of support back in those early days. It was this just really cool community of these authors and podcasters sharing knowledge or commiserating, and it was a fun time. There was a certain magic back then. There's a little bit of that magic today, but it's different. When something's so new and people are trying new things and sometimes succeeding and sometimes failing, it just everything still has that kind of fresh, exciting, unknown kind of sheen to it. And I don't think anyone would have predicted back then. Well, maybe Evo Terra would have, but where kind of podcasts would evolve to, which really, they've kind of become this kind of cornerstone pop culture thing that they're on Spotify now, which I had no idea until 6 months ago that there were podcasts on Spotify. So it's pretty wild to think where things kind of began. I remember on the webpage for the Crescent podcast, had to have a frequently asked questions that explain, what is a podcast and how do I listen to one? And it was, now I think a lot more people know what podcasts are.
So a couple of things. First, everybody, he mentioned Evo Terra. That is a person's name, and that is the person who started Podiobooks. So that's who that was when he referred to Evo Terra. I did want to say that podcasting back then seemed like one big community. And, now it seems like sort of like a tiered community. There's, just like everything else, there's the big wigs and then the middle wigs and then us peons. And by the way, I believe that you're in the middle wigs. You're not a peon like me, but
I'll take it. I think 10 or more years ago, that sense of community and we're all peers, right, was kind of omnipresent. And then as time kind of went on, then you sort of saw this hierarchy develop, advertent or inadvertent, I really couldn't say, but now you look at it today, and then you definitely have these, powerhouses, maybe corporate sponsored or network sponsored podcasts, and then you have kind of the rest of us.
Yes, the rest of us indeed. Okay, so Earlier, I did say that I found you on Podiobooks, but the reason that I was looking for you on Podiobooks is because a long time ago, there was a TV show called Firefly. And I had never heard of this TV show until I ran across a podcast called The Signal. And The Signal was all about Firefly. And at the time that I found it, they were really promoting this movie that was about to come out or had just come out, and it was called Serenity, which was Firefly, but in a movie. And so, I found this a little bit late, so I didn't get to see the movie in theaters, but that is where I found you. They did a section every once in a while where they would talk to a writer or a science fiction writer or podcaster or whatever, just kind of, what they were into. And you were featured on an episode of that, and you were talking about your podcast book, Crescent. And that's really where I found you. And also, that's how I found Firefly and Serenity. So I was super happy that I found all three of you there.
Wow, that is economy of listening right there. And I remember doing that interview. The folks working on The Signal were awesome. It was one of my favorite interviews. I was a fan of their podcast, so I was tickled to get a chance to talk to them. I still keep in touch with Carrie from The Signal, and she's actually one of my supporters over on Patreon. So it's, mm-hmm.
Oh, that's amazing. I can still hear her voice.
That's cool, right? She's a good kid, that one, a good egg.
I think the guy that, what's his name, Les?
Les, right?
Yeah, I think it was Carrie and Les. Oh my gosh. You're awesome. That's so cool.
It takes it back, though, doesn't it? It's just wild, that sort of nostalgia. It's almost like Hank Morgan hitting his head and waking up in the heyday of podcasts. You see what I did there? I kind of full circled it.
I do see what you did there. That's funny. That's funny. I'm sitting here in my podcast studio. The way that my chair is facing, I'm actually staring at a framed, autographed poster for, I guess it was sort of a travel poster for the planet Shadow, and Nathan Fillion signed it. I won it at a Can't Stop the Serenity screening.
Oh, how cool.
How cool indeed.
That's awesome.
When did you know, Phil, that you wanted to be a writer?
Going back to a way early age. I mean, before I even started writing, and I've mentioned this on a few of my own podcasts, I always told my friends stories, right? I always loved telling scary stories. I always loved to see who I could scare the most, who I could keep up at night and have them come tell me the next day at school that, oh man, I couldn't sleep at all last night because of that story you told us at recess. And this is going back to like the 4th and 5th grade. And for whatever reason, I tried to scare the girls the most. I don't know if it was a attention thing. It probably was. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. But yeah, going back to elementary school, even before I had really kind of put pen to paper, I was doing that sort of vocal tradition of telling stories. And then middle school, I started actually writing things down on paper. And none of that went anywhere except into a folder that, I occasionally lost and had to replace. I wrote through high school, again, very casually, just wrote for myself or wrote for my friends, or we would kind of hang out and write together, but never really did much more than that, the kind of casual thing. I did a little online role playing later on in high school through America Online chats. Did a little sort of Southern Gothic vampire role-playing game called Black Bayou, which was a lot of fun. But again, just this casual writing. But I always knew that someday I was wondering if I could do more with it. Tinkered with it in college, but not too much. And it wasn't until, I think, 2005 where I really started to get more serious about writing. I was inspired by podcasting, seeing that these authors were basically getting their work out there in front of a wider audience. And at the time, that was really what I was very interested in. It was just getting my work out there to an audience. And so podcasting really energized me. And though I had written one or two novels prior to 2005, it was a combination of discovering podcasting, falling in love with Firefly, that I said, you know what, I'm going to write an episodic, not a novel, right? Just a serial story, maybe break it up into seasons, and that was Crescent. And it was within 3 chapters or 3 parts of writing Crescent where I said, you know what, this really feels like a novel, so it's going to be a novel. And that's just history right there, and then I haven't, really looked back.
So was Crescent really inspired by Firefly?
What kind of inspired me about Firefly was I love the sort of combination of science fiction, but then it had that real frontier sense to it as well. That kind of planted the seed, and I said, well, what about a creepy haunted space station on the gateway to the savage frontier of outer space, and I had, believe it or not, the planet in Crescent around which and I don't think I've ever mentioned this in an interview before, which is funny. So I think this is a Fascination Street exclusive. The planet and the sort of research station on this planet, spoiler alert, that's all I'll say about that, was something that actually came to me in a dream like several years earlier. This very just vivid dream, and there were these people on this planet, and they had discovered something on this planet, and I just, it was so vivid. The planet itself was so vivid. The weather, all that was just so striking to me that I got up and I drew a picture of some of the stuff they saw, and then I kind of just filed it away. But that was one thing that kind of stuck with me, and that kind of came back into my imagination when I set about writing the book. Little tidbit, little unreleased trivia for you right there.
Little tidbit indeed. Now, that's when you decided that you needed to be a writer. When did you decide that you needed to be a musician?
Yeah, I started playing music in elementary school. I owned a band, but I had tinkered around with the piano before that. In middle school, my friends and I conceived of putting bands together, which really amounted to me and one of my best friends, Brian Tubbs, who I still communicate with to this day. We're still buddies. Our band consisted of he and I in his bedroom with 2 Casio keyboards and a ton of cables going everywhere to plug into his stereo and my stereo so we could record these ridiculous songs, half of which were comprised of the pre-programmed keyboard beats. But I've always loved music. I've always been way into listening to music, so it was just something that I knew that I was going to do. Got a guitar, I think, when I was 14. Taught myself guitar and have been playing music ever since. And all kinds of music, too. I think part of that has to do with I have a really kind of eclectic taste in music, which sometimes can be a challenge for me when I'm trying to decide what kind of music do I want to work on, what do I want to focus on this year. So, but yeah, again, early on, it was something that was just, I knew it was something I had to do.
If you had to name an influence from maybe each genre that inspired you, name a couple.
Okay, so we're talking musically here, right? So
yes, sir.
Okay, so for the darker kind of electronic, kind of brooding music, I would say Trent Reznor, 100%, Nine Inch Nails, huge influence. I think you'll hear some of that in some of the music I've done for the trance, so that's a huge influence there. Rock and roll, we're talking bands like The Doors and Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones for the classic stuff. Then maybe a little more modern stuff, bands like Jane's Addiction, huge influence right there. Then you're talking maybe some post-punk bands, Bauhaus, The Cure, obviously, some of the pillars right there, though. I would say The Doors, Jane's Addiction, Led Zeppelin, Nine Inch Nails, Depeche Mode, The Cure.
That is just about exactly the same list that I compiled. Because I was listening to some of your music and I was like, okay, so clearly this man is influenced by, and I made a list. And that is almost exactly, that's almost exactly my list. I did add Biffy Clyro. I don't know if you've heard him.
Oh, yeah. I wouldn't say he is in my catalog, but I know he's probably come up on some of my playlists.
I'm sure. And I feel like he was heavily influenced by Foo Fighters. So, that's an easy bridge. That's an easy bridge to gap. Is Crescent, first tell everybody what Crescent is about. Crescent was your first novel. What's it about in a nutshell? Get people excited about wanting to hear it.
It's about a haunted space station, and this character, Gerald Evans, who is kind of the anti-hero, just wants to get by in life, wants to make a buck, maybe get out of the business, wants to score big so he can just relax, chill out, and have no one bother him, gets involved in sort of this corruption on the space station because he thought that would be an easy way out, but he gets involved in sort of the corruption on the station while also unwittingly getting wrapped up into whatever supernatural force is fucking with people on the station. So that's the nutshell version.
When does Crescent take place?
The distant future, the year 2000. I don't know if you're Fly the Concord fan. So I think, and I'll have to go back to my notes because I don't directly state it anywhere. I don't believe in the manuscript itself. I think I conceive it as happening around roughly 2685 is a number that stands out in my head.
Okay, here's why I'm asking. You mentioned that paper is only used for 3 things in that time period, but none of those 3 things that you mentioned are toilet paper. So my question is, what do they use?
Set phasers to hygiene, right?
That's right. Man, if you would have said seashells, I would have hung up.
Oh, yeah, no. Broken glass.
There you
Rusty
go.
nails.
Thank you very much. Broken glass. So is Crescent available as a hardcover and or ebook?
So Crescent is currently available as a paper book for the limited quantity that I have left. It was available as an ebook. Recently parted ways with a small press that I had been working with. Long story short, I had finished the follow-up to my other book, Eden, and I was gangbusters on getting it printed by a certain deadline that they were unable to meet. So they said, hey, as an act of good faith, we've always had a good relationship. We will release the rights of all your works back to you, and then you can do what you need to do. I said, that sounds great. Meanwhile, not really knowing what that entailed on my end to get this book ready for print. So basically, all of my ISBNs were released. So in order to get Crescent back into that ebook format, if I want to go about it the right way, then I really should pick up some ISBNs, which I have not done yet because it takes some money. So currently, you can reach out to me through my website if you want to pick up a paper copy of it. And obviously, the podcast is out there as well.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to give away 3 of them.
That's beautiful. I love that. And guess what? The remaining copies are all signed by the author.
Holler. Okay, guys, we are going to give away 3 copies of Phil Rossi's Crescent hardcover autographed novel. The first 3 people who tweet at me and Phil Rossi that you enjoyed the episode. I don't even care if you're lying, but you have to say in the tweet to both of us that you enjoyed this episode, and then I'll DM you and get your information, and I'll send you an autographed Crescent.
I like it.
Me too. Tell me about Eden.
All right, Eden, it is less horror, more sci-fi, but, it still has that sort of kind of creepy vibe to it. Loosely inspired by some of the writings of Arthur C. Clarke in terms of the unknown, in terms of discovery, in terms of the sort of mystery vibe, for lack of a better description. A giant space tree orbiting the planet Uranus, we'll say, for the sake of the 12-year-olds out there, and an auditor for a company that is funding the research of Eden, which is the name of the tree, is sent out to Lola Space Station to basically see if the funding will continue or if they're going to cut the funding. There have been a number of accidents on this space station, so he's basically sent out there to kind of say, okay, we're going to write you guys another check or you're all coming back home to Earth. And so it's about his journey, meeting the people of the station, discovering what's kind of been going on the station, and getting wrapped up in the mystery of Eden. So that is Eden in a nutshell.
So it's clear that you're super into horror, but why set it in space? A lot of your work is set in space. How come?
So, as much as I am into horror, I am also very deeply into science fiction as well. And for me, when I kind of cross genres, it's an opportunity to have my cake and also eat it at the same time. I feel like there's not a wealth of horror, set in space, right, or sci-fi horror. There's some stories out there, some films, but I like to think the style of horror that I write is not so omnipresent, sort of this more like psychological horror, more this, supernatural kind of ghosty kind of horror. I don't feel like you get that as much in the genre, and so I think it's always fun to kind of mash those two up. So I guess it's it's self-serving, absolutely. I say I want to read a story like this. I'm going to write a story like this so I can enjoy it.
Nice. Tell me about Harvey.
So Harvey does not take place in space. Harvey is about a television singing sensation that goes by the name of Calvin Hubbard, who was kicked off an American Idol style singing competition show, and he was all about credibility as a musician and kind of sold out by going on the show. So he decides he's going to kind of reconnect with that musician side of himself, the artsy side of himself. So he drives out to the woods of Virginia, to a small town called Harvey, where he is going to write the album that is going to save his musical soul. But there's something going on in the town of Harvey, in the woods outside the town, something unsavory, and people are going missing, and there's just some crazy things going down, and he gets wrapped up in all of it, and that's Harvey in a nutshell. I think the tagline for Harvey is murder, mayhem, and rock and roll.
That's awesome. Maybe you should apply to be a writer for Black Mirror, because you have some twisted, dark, technocentric shit in your head.
Thank you. I take that as a compliment. I have so many stories scratching to get out. I thank God for technology. I use Scrivener to do all my writing. It's synced up on my laptop, on my phone, and on my iPad. And I have something in my binder. Basically, it's called Story Notebook or something like that. And on the fly, like I'll just be jotting ideas down there. As they come to me, I'll be on the line at the bank. I'll jot something down. So certainly there's no shortage of material, which will probably get me through until I'm 90 years old if I make it that far, which I hope I do.
You know what you should call that note app or whatever is you should call it Notes from the Vault.
I should. That makes a lot of sense. And I was thinking a long time ago, I mean, we're going back to maybe 2010 before I sort of fell off the face of the planet. Someone asked me, is there ever going to be a Notes from the Vault Volume 2? And I said, absolutely, I would love to do that. And I was sort of curating a list in my head as I was walking the dogs of a Notes for the Vault Volume 2. And my goal is, in the next year, to revisit the Notes from the Vault Volume 1, polish up those stories, tweak them, possibly repodcast them, possibly not, but then have both volumes offered in print is the goal.
That'd be dope as shit.
Damn straight.
Tell me about Phil Rossi and the Bad Habit.
Wow, okay, that's going way back. Phil Rossi and the Bad Habit was one of my musical endeavors, probably back around the time I started podcasting. We'll call it dark folk Americana, maybe a Tom Waitsy kind of vibe to it a little bit as well. Sort of a mostly acoustic group, some percussion. My buddy had a nice white Telecaster, some fiddle here and there. So that was my post-hard rock project. Before that, I was in a band called Candlestick Ashtray, which was just straight up hard rock and roll. Played lead guitar in that band, very inspired by the Cult.
Oh my God, that's badass. So, a few years ago, you stopped writing, and maybe even before that, you stopped podcasting. Can you talk about why you stopped doing both of those things since they were so important to you?
Yeah, so maybe around 2011, not to get into too many grisly details, but life calamity, we'll call it. And life as I kind of knew it changed completely. And it was a high stress period of time. And I was in survival mode and did not have the mental bandwidth to put into the sort of creative work, into the writing, really. The music I kind of kept up with. I kind of kept my band going through this time. But again, there's the difference between, I think, for me at least, music and writing, and maybe not today, but back then, was that music was an easier escape because it was a little bit more effortless than the writing. It was easier to kind of get locked into that focus pretty instantly, whereas the writing, you sit down, you get in that mindset, and then you got to keep that focus even through periods where you're not typing or doing anything and you're just trying to construct ideas. I feel like that part of my brain was creating at that time, but really it was creating kind of worst case scenarios for what I was dealing with in life and how I would, mitigate these things and how I would kind of navigate what was happening. So I was still thinking, and my mind was still creating, but it was creating survival tools and not able to create fiction. Yeah, that stopped me dead in my tracks. Podcasting stopped first, and then the writing stopped shortly thereafter. It was probably maybe 3 or 4 years before I really started writing anything new again. It was right around the time I moved out of an apartment and into a townhouse when I started writing again. I think the first thing I wrote was a story called Silk and Old Tree, which was a horror short story that also kind of plays on a little bit of some of the stuff going on in my life at that time. It was a dry spell for a while. The music and the writing, right, those are two kind of pillars of my existence. They kind of are big aspects that define me as a person and that kind of nurture my soul. One cannot ever, substitute or fill the gap for the other. So if I'm just doing music and I'm not writing, or if I'm just writing and not doing music, I always have this sense of that, that something is missing. So it was great to start writing again.
Interesting. Well, thank you for coming back.
It's good to be back.
Let's talk about your music for just a minute. Are you currently in a band called Gravity Lens?
Gravity Lens was my last sort of band project. We played our last show in 2016, and that's sort of been on a kind of permanent hiatus, unfortunately, because that band was a lot of fun.
So do you play publicly?
I have a day job, but I play professionally as well. Most weekends I do solo acoustic, which sounds a little lame. I get that. I do a lot of cover shows in the area because they help me pay the bills. Fortunately, the original music shows don't quite help make ends meet. So I do a lot of solo acoustic cover shows across decades and genres, but I put very much a Phil Rossi interpretation on these songs. So I figure someone wants to go out and hear a song exactly how they hear it on the radio, they can just, throw in a CD and save themselves the tip money. It's kind of been my philosophy, and I've done very well with it. I play some really great places out here. I do a lot of looping, a lot of live looping. My full show rig is a Ableton Live rig, which is used mostly for, electronic dance music and electronic dance music performance, but I do use it for my solo acoustic shows because it gives me a lot more flexibility in terms of looping, and then I will drop in samples to mix things up. So I'll keep it entertaining for myself, and then I'll also keep it entertaining for these people that think they're just coming out to have a beer, and then all of a sudden there's this crazy performance going on. Sometimes they lose their minds, and sometimes they don't pay attention. It depends on the night.
Well, you did a cover of a song called Fascination Street by The Cure, and I was wondering if I might be able to play that song in this episode.
Yes. So I went about that in a legit fashion, securing the rights to do a cover of it. So you should be all clear to go ahead and do that.
How in the hell did you do that?
How did I get the rights to it?
Yes.
There's a service, which I can't remember the name off the top of my head. I need to find that bookmark, because there's at least 2 more covers that will be part of the Trance soundtrack. One of them is Bela Lugosi's Dead by Bauhaus, which I've already kind of teased out there a little bit. The other is a very, very, very special cover that I'm not going to say a word about because I want it to be a surprise. But there's a service that basically they kind of do all the paperwork for you, essentially. It's a digital online service. You tell them, okay, how many anticipated downloads do you have? Oh, is it going to be streaming only? You pay a fee to get the rights to do the cover of the song, and that's it.
Wow. Well, so yes, I can play it?
Yes, you can play it.
All right, guys. Here is Fascination Street, originally by The Cure, this time performed by Phil Rossi.
Fascination Street. Let's cut the conversation, get out for a bit. Stop feeling I'm fading, impaling, I'm begging to drag it down with me, to kick the last nail in. Yeah, I like you in that, like I like it in the screen. But if you open your mouth, then I can't be held responsible for what goes in. All the camera comes out. Just pull on your hair, just pull on your power, and let's move to me. Just let me know that it's over. If you slip going under, slip over my shoulder. Just pull on your face, just pull on your feet, and let it open in time. Down on Fascination Street. Just open your mouth, pull on your face, pull on your feet, and let it open in town, down on Fascination Street. Down on Fascination Street. Down on Fascination Street. Down on Fascination Street. Down on
Oh my God, Phil. I want to make love to that song. And I don't mean that I want to have sex while that song is playing. I mean, I actually want to have physical sex with that song.
I have loved that song forever. There was a passage of the trance when I was working on that passage. I mean, that song was front and center in my skull, and I said, I need to cover this song for the Trance podcast. And working on it was one of those just musical, like magical moments where, I kind of started out bare bones and had the bass riff going, but there's this other sound that I was hearing in my head that would come in before that bass riff that would be in the same key, and so you might have that sort of subconscious like memory if you knew the song of what you're about to hear, and then it just kind of blends in with it complements the bass riff. And when I kind of tweaked my synths and got that, that sound, it was just one of those moments where I had the chills, and I said, fuck yeah, this is it.
When I first heard that song, the day that I heard it, I'm surprised that the cops didn't get called on me because I was blasting that. I was shaking the windows for over an hour just on repeat listening to that song. It's fucking amazing.
Thank you. It does lend itself to being playing loud.
Nicely done. A tip of the hat, sir.
Thank you, good sir.
Now, I listened to Far Stones, and it sort of ended what I believe to be sort of a cliffhanger. Will there be a season 2?
There is a season 2 of Far Stones. I believe I'm one episode away from finishing the first draft.
Nice. Let's talk about Mirror Mirror.
Mirror Mirror.
You had said that you had a dream, and that's what inspired, I believe you said Crescent, right?
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
So toward the end of Mirror Mirror, there's a poem that's maybe 6 or 8 lines long or something like that. It's not very long, but it's so impactful that it made me wonder if that poem is what inspired the entire story.
Yeah, so that's the Beatles.
What?
That's a song by the Beatles called In My Life.
I don't even know what else to say. I'm just amazed. No wonder it was so moving. So when I got to that part, I was like, holy shit. This must have been the whole reason he wrote the story. He probably wrote the story around this. So, wow.
I can see that. So I'll tell you, I wrote that story. That was probably the last thing I wrote. It was the last time the metaphorical pen was touching the paper, was this story, which there's a lot of metaphors in this for some of the stuff that I was dealing with back then. And it appeared in an anthology called When the Hero Comes Home, which was edited by Ed Greenwood of Forgotten Realms fame and Gabriella Harbauer, who was actually my editor at the time. So I submitted the story to them, and it was in the anthology. I never felt like it was complete, if that makes any sense. And then through Patreon, I finally felt it was time to revisit the story. There were a lot more things going on in my life that were related to what was going on back in 2010. Everything kind of came together when I started working on that story again, which is why I mentioned to you in email that it's just so close to my heart. Honestly, when I was finishing the story, I mean, I sat there, I probably cried for about half an hour. It was a very just powerful, emotional, moving experience, which I have not duplicated much in my life as a writer, I think. But then it happened again, honestly, when I finished working on the Eden sequel too, which was also a very kind of emotionally powerful journey for me. But yeah, this story was not around that that Beatles song, but when I got to that scene in the rewrites, the song just kind of came to me. This was the right song to put in there.
Well, that all makes perfect sense. It sounds like writing is very cathartic for you, and it may cross a line, but let me say that I'm sorry that you stopped having that catharsis for those few years. It sounds like it's something really, really healthy for you, and I hope you continue to do it, and don't slack off, fella.
Yeah. There's no slacking off at this point. I'm overcommitted, so I can't slack off. I'm screwed.
Let's talk about Patreon, my friend.
Yeah, definitely. Patreon. I love Patreon. Patreon was my leap of faith, my Hail Mary. So I'm going to invest some time and effort into this Patreon thing. let's see if it pays off, and it did. And when I say pay off, I mean it got me back to producing content, writing, and podcasting, and getting it out there. At the time when I was kind of flirting with Patreon, I had been writing. I was back to writing. I had been kind of writing a lot more consistently that year leading up to Patreon. The problem was I didn't have enough time or bandwidth to go from draft to produced podcast, right? I was playing a ton of gigs at the time to make ends meet. I couldn't sacrifice gig time to work on writing when writing wasn't, helping me pay the bills or put food on the table. And I said, well, some people have had success with Patreon. Let me see, my goal is if I can replace 3 or 4 shows a month with income from my writing, then I can justify podcasting and writing again. And that is essentially how it worked. I'm not going to say it was not an overnight success. It's taken a ton of legwork, a ton of self-promotion, a ton of social media, a ton of virtual door-to-door where I was reaching out daily to former listeners and sending them individual messages. I must have sent like 1,000 of these individual messages to people saying, hey, well, here's what I'm doing now. If you're interested, please check it out. And I would say I probably had a 10% return on that effort, but that 10% really is my core subscriber base. Those folks have stuck with me for the last year and a half. You see some ebb and flow in your subscribers, but it's been enough to keep me going for this long. And 2018, the goal is to double my subscriber base and keep going for much longer.
Hey guys, just a quick break in here to let you know that I'm a member of Phil's Patreon page, and I think you should be too. So here's what I'm going to do. Everybody who signs up this month, October 2018, to join Phil's Patreon page, send me a screenshot of the Welcome to Phil Rossi's Patreon page to fascinationstreetpod@gmail.com and include your mailing address, and I'll send you a sweet surprise thank you from Fascination Street Podcast. I now return you to your regularly scheduled podcast.
So from a platform, it's been fantastic for kind of keeping me going, and then the nature of the beast, the more you write, for me at least, the more inspired I get, and that's been the case with Patreon. And it's funny because I've been doing flash fiction here and there through Patreon, and the story currently running right now, the novel, The Trance, started off as flash fiction. It was like a 3-story flash fiction arc that I fell a little bit in love with, and the ideas just came at me. And so I said, okay, this has legs. And so I wrote the first manuscript for The Trance, and now here I am. I finished rewrites on the 9th episode. The story has evolved in remarkable ways that have really caught me off guard, even as the author. It's been a ton more work than I anticipated, but it's been worth it to put the extra effort in on this and go the extra distance. From a production standpoint, very similar to Crescent in terms of I'm doing a lot of sound design work, a lot of scoring and music as well. This is the full deal, so for any Crescent fans would probably be pretty into The Trance.
Well, it's super dope, might I say. And also, there is an accompanying soundtrack.
Correct. And the soundtrack so I'm composing this soundtrack as I work on the episodes. The Trance is an interesting project, not just subject matter-wise. I've never written a vampire, cyberpunk, noir, detective novel before, so this is the first for me. But also, I'm rewriting chapters as I go, right? I'm podcasting shortly after rewriting the chapters, and then as I edit the narration, I'm building the soundscape and music. So everything is all almost happening at once, which is crazy, and it's a ton of work. I mean, it's also fun, too. I mean, don't get me wrong, I might be up late, several nights during the week putting these things together, week by week. I'd say, a 40-minute episode is probably at least 4 hours of production time, at least. But I'm really happy and proud of this story, and I'm looking forward to kind of seeing it through to the end. Not only to say, okay, I'm done, but also because I will be 100% honest with you, I have a vague idea of how the book is going to end. But between you and me and all of your listeners, I don't know 100% how this book is going to end. I mean, some of the bigger plot points have come to be just in the last month, right? So, your guess is as good as mine as how things are going to turn out for these characters.
Interesting. So, get us excited, Phil. What can we expect as a Patreon subscriber?
Good morning, Detective Lynn. It has been 120 hours since your last login. Current grid load is 192 per terabyte. System not really detected. System. Current trans time is 1800 hours and 34 minutes. Maintenance outage for node 3.1.1 scheduled for 0400 hours and will persist for 38.9 minutes. Destination loci. Synchronized. Insertion in 3, 2, 1.
Rumor is there's a new V-drug experience in the trance. Something mind-bending and a little bit deadly. But I didn't have to tell you that. Things aren't adding up. You noticed all the burners going missing lately? How about the bodies showing up in the little dark corners of the city? I've seen this before, and it's why I'm here now, Detective Lynn. How about I tell you a scary story? The Trance, a Phil Rossi podcast experience. For details, episode downloads, and story extras, visit www.patreon.com/Phil Rossi and sign up today.
I put out content roughly twice a month as far as the main content. So if it is serial, if it's like the trance, I try to get 2 episodes in on a monthly basis. Once a month, I do a behind-the-scenes podcast talking about what I'm working on, how I'm working on it. For certain subscriber levels, you'll have excerpts or early releases or some, dirty manuscript out there that people shouldn't see, but I put out there for folks anyway. You get musical extras from, for example, from the Trance soundtrack for download. I occasionally will do live streams where I'm either writing or editing. I would do live streams of production sessions where I'm working on, say the score for the Trance. I really, really want to do Hangouts this year, like Google Hangouts or something else, a little more interactive. So I'm really trying to figure out the best way to get people involved in something like that. So that's something I'm pushing for this year. All of my pledges will get their names in the book. There'll be a page for my Patreon subscribers with everyone's name listed for any future works that I'm going to be publishing, which hopefully in the next year there should be at least 1, 2, or 3 books. Yeah, and then just a ton of random extras throughout the telling of some of these stories. Certain short stories I will do more extras for. For example, Mirror Mirror had some video extras. I collaborated with an awesome creator, Jack Kincaid, who is responsible for an audio drama that I do voice acting in called Edict Zero. He's also a talented filmmaker, so I had him do some backstory film work for the Mirror Mirror story. The list goes on. It's variable. There might be certain surprises one month and then different surprises the next month. I just try to keep things as fresh and interesting for folks as possible, so they feel like they're getting value out of contributing to monster that I'm building. Because really, at the end of the day, it's my gratitude toward my subscribers that drives me to put out the best content. What I want to say is the best content for a podcast on Patreon. That might not be true, but I at least try to feel that's what I'm giving people, right? Because without these subscribers, again, I'd be playing 4 gigs every weekend, wishing I could edit, my manuscript, but won't take it to a gig because I'm afraid someone will, spill beer all over it. So it's, I can't thank people enough, and I try to do it through the writing and through the extras.
Well, I know that there is a level. There's several different levels, but one of the lower levels actually gives you access to the content, past and future. And I think that since it's a really low level, I think it would be really, really worth everybody who's listening's time and effort to give it a shot. Because, like I said at the beginning, this dude's writing changed my life in countless ways. So I think everybody listening should at least give it a shot. Where can we find this?
Patreon.com/Phil Rossi. I would love it if you listeners of this fine podcast gave it a shot. You're doing good things over here, and I think people deserve to hear that, and I will certainly be sending people your way.
Thank you.
As I have already, believe it or not. I don't know if you've seen my tweets, but
I appreciate that.
Trying to guide people your way. It's $3 for the level that we're talking about here. We're pretty much get you access to all the stories. Less than a cup of coffee a month, and far less than a movie ticket, right? Take a chance on me.
Everybody who's listening, it's $3. I don't charge you anything at all for my shit, so at least give Phil a shot. It's totally worth it. You won't regret it. I promise. And that's patreon.com/Phil Rossi.
That's right.
All right, Phil, tell us where we can find you on social media and your website, and hit me with that Patreon link one more time.
On the social media, you can find me on Instagram at Phil Rossi Media, on Twitter at Phil Rossi, Facebook.com/The Real Phil Rossi, on Patreon, of course, at Patreon.com/Phil Rossi.
Nice. And do you have a website, Phil?
PhilRossi.net.
.net. All right, guys. Those social media links and website links will be in the show notes, as well as that Patreon link. Please, please, please reach out to Phil in any of those manners and tell him that you enjoyed listening to him on this episode. Phil Rossi, thank you so very much for taking the time to hang out with me today. I really, really, really appreciate it. And hopefully we can keep in touch, man. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Definitely, man. I would love that.
Thank you so much, Phil. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, man. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Opening music is the song Magnolia from the 2014 album In Transigence, used with permission from Douglas Miles Clark. Closing music is Apollo from the 2001 album Into the Known by the band Sapphire. Thanks for hanging out with us and getting to know a little bit about our guest. We'll see you next time on Fascination Street.